Lovely, thank you, Kathy. I would like to put in an official complaint to the events team who scheduled me to go after Teresa Kremin. Really? So yeah, a tough act to follow. Absolutely fantastic talk from her. I was listening and learning, as I always do from her. Over to me then to talk about the link between phonics and reading for pleasure and whether they are mutually exclusive. Let me just get my chat box up on screen so anyone can ask me any questions throughout. Yeah, lots of comments there for Teresa. Fabulous, great, inspiring, lots of ideas. Always lots of ideas. So we are going to have a little think about in this session, phonics and reading for pleasure. Are they mutually exclusive? Well, certainly it's undeniable that they are different beasts. We're sort of comparing things that are essentially very different. Phonics is a method of teaching children to read and write. Phonics is a body of knowledge that is necessary for children to learn to read and spell. Because of the complex alphabetic code of English, children are taught explicitly the correspondences between letters and sounds, as well as the skill of blending those individual sounds together to read. That's the definition taken from the recent reading framework. And then, of course, reading for pleasure, reading that we do of our own free will, anticipating the satisfaction that we will get from the act of reading. It also refers to reading that, having begun at someone else's request, we continue because we are interested in it. And that's a definition taken from National Literacy Trust. So we know that they're linked. There's something, there's a connection there, but what is this relationship? And I'll be very transparent with you. I'm really hoping that I might be able to shift some mindsets and show people that phonics is not so far removed from the sort of work that we do around developing and nurturing reading for pleasure. Do they contradict each other? So I want to bust myths, and I think that historically, and in some cases still today, phonics is perceived as technical, robotic, dull, a process, a necessity. It's formulaic. Certainly with all the recent validation process with SSPs, we're all looking for the magic formula of how we can make phonics more effective. It can be unexciting, uninspiring, overly restrictive, unnatural language structures, stressful, and a means to an end. We do it because we need to do it because we know that it'll get the kids reading. And then reading for pleasure has so many positive descriptions and positive connotations. It's a positive thing. There's an abundance of benefits, as Teresa's just demonstrated. It's about the skill and the will. It nurtures our well-being. It's our ultimate goal. We learn to read perhaps through phonics, and then we can read to learn and read for enjoyment, for pleasure, the feel-good factor, reading culture, inspiration, motivation. So this kind of sets those two things as looking very different. They're very far apart, actually. And I do know that this is a common sort of thought that people have. Why the hate on phonics? Well, let me explain to you where this has come from. Historically, we're talking sort of over the development of phonics programs over several decades. Those programs, the reading texts that went alongside them and the books that were developed, the early decodable reading books, have in a lot of those cases been produced by individual teachers and phonics specialists rather than a publishing team. So we're literally talking about somebody just at home, even before the days of having computers, people on typewriters and photocopying and developing their own materials. Now, whilst this has meant a lot of content that is great for decoding practice, so perfectly good decoding stuff, great for the classroom, great for that teaching purpose, they have naturally lacked that physical appeal of a commercially produced book. So thinking about, judging things on their covers, like Teresa mentioned about looking at the front cover and how does it look, a lot of early phonics materials don't look lovely. They look very plain, they look very dull. And whilst we've been using those in the classroom historically, alongside that, lovely books were being produced that are sort of, commercially produced lovely books, and that there wasn't an alignment, they weren't married up. Then, of course, the writer, whoever was producing the decodable materials and the schemes, is highly likely to have been unable to afford to employ illustrators or designers. They were literally doing everything themselves. They may also have chosen to prioritize decoding practice over things like grammatically correct sentence structures. So their focus, the focus of what they wanted those resources for and those texts for, had a really specific purpose. They weren't concerned about reading for pleasure or, developing children's interest or thinking about that intrinsic motivation for reading for pleasure. They were thinking very much about a teaching tool, and I'm not going to worry about the grammatically correct sentence structure. I just really want these words, this decoding practice. Furthermore, the writers and the creators of those early materials may have had a real phonics expertise, but not necessarily that natural flair as an author. And that's something that can be very hard to find as a natural talent, or as a skill that you learn to be an author can take a long time, many, many years of really being put through your paces by a publishing team and an editorial team. So it's not easy to make decodable materials that are enjoyable and have that kind of X factor that you might get with a sort of a real author. And then, of course, as we've gone on through time and as decodable books have become developed by publishers, they're still faced with that constant challenge of trying to create really great content for children, trying to inspire this early love of reading, at the same time as having to manage and juggle and deal with heavily restricted or unusual word banks. And that's one of the things that can sometimes be really criticised about decodable readers or phonics materials, that they're awkward, they're unnatural, the words weren't a natural fit. It wasn't the way that we would do it if we were writing a real book. So this leads us to think then to another sort of train of thought about the relationship between phonics and reading for pleasure. And this is another sort of viewpoint that people do have. We've got this phrase, phonics first, fast and only, which has been bandied around over the years. And the intention was good with this phrase, phonics first, fast and only, but actually it has become somewhat misinterpreted. And what it's resulted in is that even though we might be talking about phonics in a very positive way, that phonics is important, it's quite magical, it's rewarding when children are able to lift those words off the page. They can literally decode them, they can read those words. And we can do that first, and we can do it fast, and we can do that only. We don't mix it with our other reading skills. We really focus on that decoding first. That enables us then to move quickly to reading for pleasure. So let's smash the phonics, let's get that done, get them in, get it taught, and then we're unlocking it for children. We're opening that sort of treasure chest of the magic of reading and developing that love. So this is a relationship. And you could argue, therefore, that phonics perhaps underpins reading for pleasure. It's the very foundations underneath, and we can do all that technical work, and then we can reach this reading for pleasure sort of element. But it's still a very separate relationship. They're still not working together in this relationship. And this might be your opinion, might be other people's opinion. It's one way of looking at it. I would like to put forward the case that actually I feel very strongly that it is entirely possible for phonics and reading for pleasure to work alongside one another, really intertwined, to really be happening at the same point. And it would be foolish of us to develop phonics, for example, first and to deal with that side of things without still thinking about the reading for pleasure element. Phonics isn't something that we just do for a moment in time. It is a lifelong reading skill. Adult, mature, able readers use phonics knowledge and skills when we encounter new or challenging words. Phonics categorically isn't something that stops once we can read. It happens early on for our teaching and learning primarily, and we add to that toolkit with all of our wider reading skills as we progress, but we still always use some phonics. And so we need to not perceive phonics as in a box, in a block of time, in the infants, in school, and that's it. It's something that's much bigger than that and affects our reading as we move forwards. And then, of course, reading for pleasure, we want that as a lifelong habit. We don't wait until after we've taught phonics. We aim to develop it from the very beginning, from birth. We see the excitement on our toddlers' faces when they're learning about holding a book and opening a book and listening to a story. These are our first opportunities to kind of build that relationship with books and with reading. We nurture that reading for pleasure alongside the teaching and learning of phonics in school, and then we hope that we will develop it further and further as children get older, and that it will become a lifelong habit that they take forward with them into adulthood. So a little bit, I think it helps to have a different definition of phonics. And this varies, and it's quite personal. This is kind of my way of doing things. I think phonics is helpful to take out of that box. In a way, we've taken phonics out of the box when we think about timescale. We think about the time of the lesson. When we had Letters and Sounds 2007, we were thinking about a 20-minute slot for our phonics teaching. And we've unlocked that. We've opened that up. We know now that about 30 minutes for a lesson, or in the reading framework, it even gives us permission that we can teach an element of phonics for up to an hour if we feel that we need to. And that's an acknowledgement that phonics is not just phonics. So these things on this little map here are the different types of things that we might teach at the same time as phonics. Now, some people like to keep phonics very pure, very separate from everything else, very focused, remove all of the fluff, make it so pure, teach everything else at another time. But I believe that if when we teach phonics, we're teaching the knowledge of that alphabetic code, those letter sound correspondences, all of those different pronunciations and all of those different spellings, to automaticity, so we know that really, really well. We're also teaching the skill of blending, literally being able to decode and lift those words off the page. We're also teaching that skill of segmenting, being able to break up a whole spoken word into its sounds ready for writing. We're also teaching the skill of handwriting, forming those letters whilst we learn what they look like and how they sound. It would be crazy of us to not teach at the same time application of that at code level. So application of our letters and sounds with reversibility. Can children see letters and produce the sound they need to read those? Can they hear sounds and they know which letters represent those sounds? Application at word level and include vocabulary. Some definitions of phonics do not include talking about vocabulary, but it would absolutely kill me if in a phonics lesson I said to my children, right children, let's read this word jig, jig. The word is jig. If a child didn't say to me, oh, excuse me, miss, what does jig mean? I don't know the word jig. Oh my goodness, I'm devastated. I want an ethos of interest and intrigue and curiosity about the meanings of those words. So it's really important to me that if I'm going to teach the word jig, we're going to read the word jig, that I teach children what a jig is, and we might get up and we might do a silly little jig together. Then application at sentence level. And you'll have all heard horror stories about what happened over the years as phonics became strongly sort of more present on the agenda. It became a bigger deal. Everybody did more phonics, got better at phonics. And actually we ended up with lots of children barking at print, a mismatch of the skills. They can read the text, but they're not really understanding what's going on in those stories. So we want application of their phonics at sentence level, and we want them to get to a point where they've got some fluency and they've got comprehension of the sentences. And then also at text level, we want them to apply their phonics skills to reading texts and really understand and explore and enjoy what is going on in those texts. So for me, this is where it really links. Phonics is basic literacy skills that form a big part of the picture of learning to read and becoming a reader in all senses of the word reader. So I want to show you and not just tell you. And when I listen to talks from Reading for Pleasure specialists like Teresa or my dear friend and colleague Ruth Baker-Leask, I always come away with all the feels, especially when they share a book. And of course, Teresa didn't let us down. She shared a story, and I come for the story. I come to listen to Teresa share that story with me, and I love it. That means a lot to me, and I really get pleasure from listening to that and taking that moment to sort of be quiet and absorb myself in that process. And so rather than me sort of waffling on and trying to persuade you that I think that phonics can work with Reading for Pleasure, they're not so far removed, I want to show you that it's achievable with phonics materials. So I'm going to ask you to listen, enjoy, and then reflect on a story that I'm going to read. And I want you to think about, do you get all the feels when I read you this story? Does it touch you? Does it touch you in the same way that a real book would? And I'd like you to think and you to decide, is it possible that phonics and Reading for Pleasure can be authentically intertwined, or am I crazy? And you'll have your own opinion, but let's see how we go. So this story is called Bedtime for Luna. It's part of the Rocket Phonics Teaching and Learning Programme. When we designed this story, we were thinking about that we really wanted it to be a real story. So this is not a story where we are trying to replicate, we're trying to pretend it's a real story when it's not a real story. First and foremost, this is a real story. It's the same quality as a book that you would get if you went to your local independent bookstore. This story is designed to be read by the teacher to the children as part of a phonics lesson. It provides a stimulus for teaching the letter sound correspondence with words in context, but it also importantly provides a model of narrative language, rich vocabulary, and phonemic awareness. And often children will choose to revisit these stories via electronic devices and headphones. They might ask later to go on and listen or go back on with a group and explore and have some more book talk about the story. Bedtime for Luna, episode 1, I Can't Go to Bed Yet. The sky was getting dark. The stars were beginning to twinkle, and the moon was smiling softly on the streets below. Luna yawned a great big yawn. It was her bedtime. She looked through the window and watched a pair of bats dancing around outside in the moonlight. Luna was a polite and well-behaved girl, but she did not like going to bed. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. Finish your bedtime snack and put your plate by the sink. Luna was in the kitchen eating strawberry jam on toast. She had just finished and was just about to clear her plate away when, I can't clear my plate away yet, Dad, replied Luna. It's really dangerous. There are kangaroos in the kitchen. They're having a jumping contest while balancing plates of jelly. Boing, boing, went the kangaroos. Wibble, wobble, went the jellies. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. I'm sure the kangaroos will get tired of all that jumping around soon. Let's get you in the bath. Luna was in the living room. She was just about to go upstairs for her bath when, I can't go up for my bath yet, Dad, replied Luna. I can hear Mum's van outside. I need to say goodnight to her, but I'm 7th in a queue of very injured animals. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. Your bath is ready. Mum will come and say goodnight to you after she's checked all those animals in the queue. Luna went up to the bathroom. She was just about to get into the bath when, I can't get into my bath yet, Dad, replied Luna. There's a walrus swimming in the water. There isn't any space in the bath for me, and everything in here is wet, wet, wet. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. Tidy away the toys in your bedroom. We can wait for that walrus to finish washing himself. Luna went into her bedroom. She was just about to tidy up her toys when, I can't tidy my toys away yet, Dad, replied Luna. A family of foxes has set up a den in my room. There are 6 cubs sleeping in an old toy box, so I'd better not make too much noise. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. Leave the toys for now. We don't want to disturb those fox cubs. Do you need a last drink of water? Get it now before you snuggle down. Luna went back down to the kitchen. She passed Mum on her way downstairs and gave her a quick hug. She went into the kitchen and was just about to fill a glass of water when, I can't get a drink yet, Dad, yelled Luna. There's a massive yak blocking the sink and he's yelling that he wants some yogurt. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. The yak is welcome to have some yogurt. I'll bring you up a glass of water in a little while. Do you have Mr. Zed? Luna panicked. Mr. Zed was Luna's special toy zebra, and she always cuddled him at bedtime. She ran back up to her bedroom and looked across the pile of toys on the floor. I can't find Mr. Zed, Dad, replied Luna. I think he's hiding somewhere. Maybe he thinks we're still playing hide and seek. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. Don't worry, I'm sure Mr. Zed hasn't gone far. Go and brush your teeth while I look for him. Luna went back into the bathroom. She was just about to brush her teeth when, I can't brush my teeth yet, Dad, replied Luna. There's a swarm of bees in the sink and I can't reach the toothpaste. Bzzz, bzzz. Time for bed, Luna, said Dad. I'll lure the bees away with some sweet honey. And look, I found Mr. Zed. Brush your teeth, then climb into bed and snuggle down. Luna went back to her bedroom. She tiptoed past the family of foxes, who were all now sleeping soundly. She was just about to climb into bed when, "I can't get into my bed yet, Dad," replied Luna. "It's full of frogs, hens, bugs, and bears. There's no space for me." "Come on, Luna, it really is getting late. Time for bed," said Dad. "Tell all those animals that if they make you a space, I'll come and read everybody a bedtime story." Luna went over to her bookshelf. She was just about to choose a bedtime story when, "I can't choose a bedtime story, Dad," replied Luna. "There's a giant squid reading all of my books. He says he's using them to write questions for a quiz." "Really, Luna?" sighed Dad, as he and Mum walked into Luna's bedroom. "Don't worry, we can all do the quiz before you go to sleep." Luna's Mum and Dad looked at each other and smiled. Luna was already fast asleep. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was inspired by reading by people like Teresa and Ruth. And I hope that gave you an idea about how actually we can start to marry up. If we put the work in as providers and producers of phonics materials and really work hard to make great quality text, then we can marry the two together. But I hear you say, what about independent reading? That was an example of obviously an adult reading to a child, and then the children can go and they can listen themselves, but it's not necessarily about them reading that text themselves. How can we make decodable readers, the independent decodable readers, really fabulous to encourage accessible, independent reading for pleasure? Well, the answer is this. As publishers, so when I work with Reading Planet, when I work with the team at Rising Stars, we seek out the most talented authors. We find the talent, we develop the talent, we work really hard with people's skills, and we look for real authors. We seek out the most talented illustrators. I don't do the illustrations myself because I cannot draw a good illustration. We seek out those really expert illustrators to give us the best quality pictures. We use the best team of editors, a team of people who are going to be really hard on us and push us to be the best that we can. We develop an ethos of we can produce really high quality literature, and we will do that and enable it to match with the phonics. We listen carefully to experienced reviewers. All the materials that we produce, we send out, and we have reviewed by experts, people who've had entire lifetimes working with literature and with children. And we work with schools and we listen to children's feedback, the most important voice in the room, the children's feedback. Are they enjoying the material that we're producing? Really, I hear you say, can the lowest level of decodable reader be amazing? And you've all heard it said before, those low-level readers, it's impossible. They're so boring. There are hardly any words that you can use. Can you really make a decent reading book that will inspire children and motivate them, that'll give them that intrinsic motivation to want to read? Well, this is the challenge we give our authors. So the brief might look like this. We say, right, the lowest level of decodable reader, it's going to have 10 pages, which is 5 double-page spreads. You can only have 1 sentence per spread at this low level. You can use between 3 to 7 words per sentence, usually about 5 words a sentence. But we want you to use, as far as humanly possible, full grammatically correct sentences using natural language. Your word bank is what we might call the SATPIN word bank. You've got the letters and the sounds, s, at, ip, n. And so the words that you can use in this book are as, at, an, in, is, tip, tap, pin, pan, sat, sit, and, nip, nap, tin, sits, nips, tips, and taps. Your common exception words that you can use, no, go, to, into, the, and I, and that is it. That's all you can use. And yet, with that challenge, we want interesting, engaging, humorous, factually accurate books and stories that are reflective of real life and children's experiences, texts that are relevant, modern, diverse, inclusive, fabulous, amazing, inspiring. No pressure there then. Do we do it? Well, here is an example. This is an author that we're incredibly lucky that writes for us in Rocket Phonics. This is Isabel Thomas. She's very well known. She's an award-winning science writer, author of more than 150 books for young audiences, and certainly I find her work utterly inspiring. She's also very talented and is able to work with the brief that we give and understands the phonics. And we're going to look at one of her books used at this incredibly low level called Ants. Ants by Isabel Thomas. This is the front and back cover so that you can just see, yeah, low level reader, and we've got that sapping group of sounds that we're going to use. It is an ant. The ant pats it. And what we've got going on here, whilst we've got the illustration, we're following the story of this little girl while she's in her garden and she's exploring and she's using her magnifying glass to look at the little tiny ants on the leaf. We've got the sort of zoomed in aspect with these fabulous high quality photographs. And we've got a lot of subject knowledge here. Actually mentioned in the cover notes for this book is a little note about how ants work alongside aphids. The ants protect and nurture the aphids. So they literally look after them, they pat them, the ants pat the aphids. And in return, the aphids produce a honeydew sap that the ants then drink. The ant sips the sap, sip, sip, sip. Absolutely intriguing for young learners to sort of have a look at this content. Certainly my little boys, my little readers love this book. The ant nips it. So here we've got the ant being protective of the aphids because he's sort of protecting them from this ladybird and he's sort of nipping them to get them away. And we've seen in the pictures that the aphids can be yellow, they can be clear, they can be green. Loads to talk about and inspire. And then the ants go in to nap. So we've got a really wide variety of words for our decoding practice, a variety of correctly written natural language, grammatically correct sentences, as well as a really intriguing little sort of plot line about this girl looking at these ants and what the ants are doing. And they've defended their aphids, they've looked after them, they've drank the sap, and now they're going in to rest in their sort of log. So a few little final thoughts before I sort of ask for a bit of your comments and feedback, because I'm very interested to see what you all think about this idea about phonics and reading for pleasure and whether they are mutually exclusive. My opinion is that phonics and reading for pleasure do not need to be mutually exclusive if you are using an enriched approach to teach phonics. If you are going for a phonics approach that takes into account that you're doing more than just the letter sounds and the decoding, phonics is part of building up lots of little skills to sort of work on the whole sort of picture. And if your interpretation to phonics and to reading for pleasure, your attitude and your ethos within your teaching is holistic and inclusive of that we can do it all, we do it all at the same time. And I've got a really nice little example here. I have a tweet that somebody posted to me the other day, and I've just highlighted the bit that really sort of hits on my heartstrings. So this is a lovely lady, she's a head teacher, Sarah Donald, that we work with, and she's got evidence that Rocket Phonics is having an impact. They've just, in her school, she's just started using Rocket Phonics. My son is 6.5 weeks into P1, which is the reception year. He announced, "I'm blending and I can read," as he independently read Ants this morning in the car. Great self-correction when he tackled go and the, also proud mum. So although at that moment he might initially have been being asked to read that book, and it was an extrinsic motivation, he's reading it because he's being told to, because he's being asked to read it. His mum has asked him to read that book. He's not necessarily choosing to read that book. Actually, that gives me that sort of that stars in my eyes. That's that moment. That's when that intrinsic motivation is starting to seep in, when he announces, "I'm blending, I can read." That acknowledgement of independence that he's gaining through the phonics, matched with a really engaging text, is sort of the unlocking of it for him to sort of go on that journey. And so there we go. I'd like to throw it out there to you, and I'm really fascinated to know, what are your thoughts? Can you put in the chat, do you think, and there is no right or wrong answer, do you think that phonics and reading for pleasure are linked, can be linked, should be linked more? Does listening to me speak make you reflect on, actually, maybe we should look at ways that we can include more nurture of the reading for pleasure within our phonics lesson and our teaching? Or do you actually feel the opposite, that no, phonics should stay in its box, we teach the phonics, and then that will unlock the reading for pleasure when we do our other work?